Thank you very much. Thank you for the Dean's kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here. I graduated here in 1994, 20 years ago, and was the only person from my class who was crazy enough to go straight to Beijing from Bay Area. I understand more than half my class stayed in the Bay Area because this is such a beautiful place. Just walk out and look at the sun and you know. And at that point, like the dean was saying, I was thinking I was only going to be there for 2-3 years. And 20 years later, I'm still there. And I come back in the 20th year reunion and came to realize I'm not the only person in the class with more white hair than when I was here. But in any case, over this 20 years, I've been involved with 5 early stage startup companies, 2 as executive management of consumer internet companies, 3 as an early stage investor for mostly entertainment media companies. So what I want to do in the next 30 minutes or so is really to share with you the experience I've had in the last 20 years of Chinese internet, how I believe that actually the market differences is driving innovation in this market, as well as some trends I see going forward as we move to the next phase of Chinese internet. So this is what we want to talk about right now. So first of all, some background and history. 1994, the first year. The first 64K line was pulled from China to the World Wide Web around May of actually 1994. At that point, there are companies like Asia Info and Yinhaiwei, which is Chinese for Information Highway. I remember when I first landed back in Beijing, I was still using MCI Mail and CompuServe, if you still remember those names, for email and basic internet services. And my classmates went to Netscape and Cisco, and Jeff Skoll, class of 95, went to eBay to become the president of the company here in the Valley. But back in China, there weren't any consumer internet websites. So at that point, it really was infrastructure development and very, very early days. So it wasn't until 1997 to 98, this is really the first generation of consumer internet companies in China. Back then, I was an early stage investor, and we actually worked with a lot of the US media companies here, like Ziff Davis or Times Mirror, to set up an operation that publishes Chinese editions of books and magazines in China. It's like PC or PC Computing, ones that you may, and Popular Science, ones that you may be familiar with. And back in 1997, we also started a website called ZDNet China, which became CNET, which was actually with China Byte of News Corp, one of the earliest consumer internet websites. And of course, in 1998, symbolized by the 3 portals, Sina actually was founded by a merger of SinaNet, which was founded by 3 Stanford grads, and Sitong Lifang, which is a local Chinese BBS company, as well as Sohu and NetEase were the 3 portals. I personally also spent 6 years at Sohu. And during this period is really the first, phase of consumer internet companies in China. At that point, the market differences were vast in terms of time gap. There was clearly a time gap between what's happening in the Valley and what was happening in China. I would say about 2-3 years time gap of the internet development at that point in time. But as we fast forward, as I'll show you, that will the gap will be closed very, very quickly. So at that point, there was a term that a lot of people used, was copy to China. Whether it was the product models or the business models, whether you call Yahoo or whether you talk about eBay, all those Silicon Valley models were very quickly, over time, replicated around China by local entrepreneurs. Started with US models mostly, but as the internet blossomed in Asia, what you also see is Korean models and Japanese models really emerging in light of online games, mobile value-added services, and internet value-added services. These are different sectors where Korean and Japanese models, because of the mobile internet and the advent of games, became kind of the benchmarks for a lot of Chinese internet companies. So for the first generation of consumer internet companies, that's really the backdrop. Now, but at the same time, this period, all the way back 20 years ago to this day, if you look at all the major categories of Chinese internet, actually they're symbolized by local entrepreneurial companies in all sectors, really. And then what these companies have done is really localize the product as well as the business models. We talked about these Silicon Valley or Korean or Japanese models, but the first thing in terms of a key success factor is how do you localize by adaptation. If you don't adapt, a straight model from the US or Korea and Japan would fail in China because the market conditions are so vastly different. But these entrepreneurs over the last 20 years have created about over 50, I would say now, kind of listed new media companies across stock exchanges around the world. So this is really the first phase. So fast forward. When we have this first period of internet in China where still there is a time lapse and people call it a copy to China model, although founded by entrepreneurs, if you fast forward to 2005 and 2006, that's really the second really inflection point, the advent of broadband internet in China. Now, I'm in the space of online video, and besides the advent of broadband video, one phenomenon I saw was a very famous program called Supergirl. It's very similar, I think, to American Idol here in the US. And it was the top show of that year. And it really was the first show where through PC internet viral popularity, as well as using SMS to the phone to vote for these grassroots singers through a television interaction, it really was the first age of multi-screen entertainment. And it was in that backdrop that we decided to start our company, which was called OneVerge. And I'll tell a little bit about the background of that. So this is Chinese, for those who can read it. 和 has all kinds of different meanings, but it's converged into one. Like I said, our company, when it was founded, was called OneVerge. And it was founded actually as a very much a Stanford and Sandy Hook role model. It was a search fund because we didn't know what we were going to do. So we had a core team of people, some startup capital, and we spent about half a year really looking in the whole space of video and deciding what to do. But the trend was people talked about convergence for decades or long periods of time. But we saw that technology and content trends were starting to converge around 2005 and 2006 around the world as well as in China. And another story that I think the dean would appreciate is 1992, when I first came to Stanford. I was fortunate to have the dean in my first semester doing strategy with my professor. And I don't know whether you remember the first class. The first class was actually about convergence. The whole idea of strategic alignment and strategic consistency. Why it's important for a company to have the vision as well as the mission in terms of direction. Everything around it needs to be consistent. So the whole idea of convergence and converge into one was something that really stuck with me. And in Chinese, it's really interesting. Convergence, 多屏合一, 三网合一, for those who understand Chinese. 合一 is actually OneVerge. And it's multi-screens and multi-networks converging into one. And that really was the concept of the company. But most people actually recognize us with our consumer internet brands, which is Youku and Tudou. And Tudou is a website that was the second largest video website that we merged with in 2012. So this is kind of the background of how our company was founded. But during that period, and as you see, that the gap that I was talking about in the first generation of consumer internet have fundamentally changed. By the time we head to 2005 and 2006, you see a lot of the product and business models and the innovation are happening in many ways in parallel after about 10 years to 11 years of internet development around the world. And what you're seeing is these kinds of innovation is partially driven by a lot of market differences. Now, let me give you some examples. We're in the space of online video. When we first started, actually, Tudou as a website was founded before YouTube was founded, but it was roughly around the same time. So you can see that in a space when all these parameters in broadband video, in terms of flash technology, all these different parameters get to an inflection point, entrepreneurs around the world are starting these companies almost around the same time. And for Youku, for example, there are some clear market differences. when we will look at the YouTube model, for example, which is basically user-generated video, in China, I remember when I was here, the show called America's Funniest Home Videos was actually very, very popular. And so DV penetration as well as usage is actually very common here in the US. But that's not the case in China. If you go to China, when we started the company, DV penetration was really low. There's no such show as China's Funniest Home Videos. And so the whole idea of DV history and culture is very small. So Youku, for example, started as a pure UGC, as a YouTube model, for example. We wouldn't scale as a company because there wouldn't be enough content. So very, very early on, we actually started working with television stations around China, as well as production companies to syndicate content very, very early on. And before even Hulu was founded, for example. And 6 years ago, in 2009, both Youku and Tudou actually started building or developing and producing original content before it was popular for Netflix and House of Cards. And the reason behind that is really the fact that we really think what we call web native content, which means content that's targeted towards the web audience, has a bigger market opportunity in China than it is in developed countries. And let me explain why. In the US here, internet penetration is very high. So in other words, HBO and Netflix or ABCPS, the demographic they cover is actually highly similar. In China, broadcast TV also serves from 5 to 75, but the internet penetration is lower and it's highly concentrated. It used to be at the PC age about 18 to 35-year-old. Now we've entered into mobile internet probably around 15 to 45, but still a narrower demographic. So we felt there was a clear market opportunity where you can develop content that's targeted towards the audience, where the TV audience or the content designed for TV has to address to a much more mainstream and broader audience. Another very significant difference for us was actually we developed our own back-end technology ourselves. I recall YouTube used to outsource to Limelight or Akamai. And we started actually from day one actually rolling out our own video content delivery network. To this day, we still continue to build our own back-end as well as we operate that back-end. And I think YouTube really, after they were acquired by Google, they started taking these operations in-house. So as what I was describing, because of the market differences in China, a lot of innovation was actually, I would say, imposed a force because we have to adapt to these market conditions. So that's a really important part of how we think about our product model and how we think about our business model. Now, I mentioned original content. So a lot of people, when they think about original content, so what do people in the internet do in terms of online video? So this is a hit show that we've done recently. We're in our second season. This is called On the Road. This is a couple you see here. They met in high school about 20 years ago. And they started their own company together. And everybody knows tofu, right? I mean, these guys invented a machine that made tofu and made it lots of riches. And a lot of people may or may not know, there was a huge earthquake in Sichuan in the southwestern part of China a couple of years ago, and they decided to go help. And when they decided to help, they saw how short life is, and really rethink about how they think about how to lead the rest of their lives. They went back to Beijing, they decided to sell their company, and then they started going on the road, traveling around the world. And they went to, in the first season, they went to some kind of really interesting places. For example, Chernobyl. Do people remember Chernobyl, where the nuclear plant exploded? Somalia, Black Hawk Down, with it's clearly a very, very dangerous kind of environment, and a live volcano. And the fella, we call him 260 because he used to weigh 270, 270, and basically promised his then girlfriend, Liang Hong, many years ago that she would get a really momentous wedding. So in the last few episodes, in the first season, he proposed in North Pole. And the second season, we started basically with a boat from China to North America, South America, and ended up in Antarctica, where they got married about a month and a half ago in the South Pole, with us doing a live broadcast from Beijing, where we invited their mothers at the ceremony to actually witness the whole ceremony itself. So without further ado, maybe hopefully this works.
我有一外号叫270，是因体重而得名。
我喜欢老张这人，所以他干的事儿我都喜欢。
我没上过大学，我当过兵，开过小吃铺，煤地摊，卖过羊肉串。
我们都认为我们还年轻，等我有钱了，我会去完成我的梦想。可是说不定哪天这人就没了。
我说那咱们变吧，他说变就变，我说变要付出不小的代价。
我要向你求婚，
这事儿我不信。
因为我们俩这么多年，我从来没做过这样的事儿。
嫁给我。
他说，然后我一直记得我对你说的话。不管是初中对你说的，还是你上大学咱俩去讨论那个问题，他说我说过我要给你不一样的婚礼。
我说在北极求婚在南极结。
张馨予、梁红的地球之旅。
今年张馨予和梁红于6日在洛杉矶长
在
津码头
中国优酷网上面创下超过1亿次点阅率的户外真人实境秀节目，
把帆船开到南极，完成我们的婚礼。在北京，我们只交换了戒指，然后我说我拿着他的，他拿着我的，在这儿我们给双方戴上。我们结婚了。
我们结婚了。So I was having breakfast with the founder of GoPro, Nick Winman, actually just a couple of days ago. And what we're going to do was probably going to set up a dozen GoPros on that boat. They're on the way right now to South Africa and then to Brazil for the World Cup. So this has not ended. I mean, will go on. And so this is just give you a kind of a free version or a taste of what kind of original content we're producing. And besides these kinds of, whether you call it reality series or a documentary, we also do micro movies, we do web series, we actually also do animation, entertainment, variety shows, a whole myriad of different kind of entertainment. And so when we think about Youku and Tudou,
So it's not really YouTube, right? I mean, at least it's a combination of Netflix or YouTube and actually things that are actually quite different even with these models. But what we know is when we come to the US, especially when we talk to the financial community, these are easier to understand. But what we're trying to say here is we're starting to see opportunities that are actually quite different because of the market factors and market hurdles. So I want to elaborate on that a little bit more. And in China, this is a market which is on the fortunate side, there are no incumbents. So to give video as an example, we're dealing with an environment where there's no Comcast, there's no HBO, and there's no TiVo. And so the fact that when we talk to our Netflix as well as our Hulu or YouTube counterparts, in this way they envy us because, oh wow, I mean, you can actually get content so early on. I remember talking to Reed and Ted about Netflix. It's like, well, HBO locked up the window. There's a DVD window and there's the HBO window. We don't get stuff till 6 months or sometimes 3 years after, and that's why they had to go do their original content because they're getting really old library content. Whereas Chinese internet users are actually quite lucky. They come to Youku and Tudou, they can watch a lot of these TV series the day after. And movies, on a paid basis, we can usually get it about a month after it's in the theaters. So no incumbents actually gives us a big opportunity. Also, market fragmentation is another market difference that's very different. Television here, you've got basically 4 broadcast stations, 6 companies in Hollywood and Burbank that controls most of the content here in the US. In China, we're in an environment where there are hundreds of television stations. Imagine a world where nationwide there's about a dozen channels. Each province, and there's 26 of them, have 1 satellite television. Each province have multiple stations, and cities have their stations. So as if California has a dozen stations, US has another dozen stations, San Francisco has another dozen stations, and by the way, Fresno has 2, right? And so that's the market fragmentation, whether it's distribution on the production side, that creates an opportunity for us to syndicate the way that we've been able to pass. Like I said, UGC, we don't have as big as an opportunity as YouTube when it first got started, and we've done a lot of things to really encourage content like the ones that we've seen. But we have the market opportunity to syndicate content much more aggressively, and we're syndicating globally, not just in mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, US, and Europe. And that brings global content to the Chinese internet audience and really change the way that they think about the world. Now, of course, there are also a lot of negative elements in the China market that we also have to battle with. And for us, the most market one is piracy. Used to be payment was also a very big bottleneck for us because credit cards not prevalent as is in the US. But now with mobile and internet payment gateways, like Alipay or WeChat Payment, those have actually made the mobile screen a very, very accessible device for our subscription and transaction video on demand services. But piracy continues to be a problem when you look at how we work with actually the leading film companies here in Hollywood, as well as the leading film companies in China. Last year, Youku and Tudou, along with other video websites, worked with these MPA as well as the domestic film companies to really sue Baidu Video as well as QVOD, and these platforms that have a lot of piracy that continues to plague the industry. And that's an area that we will continue to have to work against, but we believe, especially if you've read the news, recently there's been a big crackdown on inappropriate content as well as pirated content in China recently. And we believe the new administration, led by Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, really is paying serious attention to these issues. And when you look in the internet, I think we're entering into really a new age in terms of how people are thinking about content. So both opportunities and hurdles is how I would like to kind of summarize. Okay, so that was really should we say, the second big phase. Now we really, starting from last year in 1.3 and 1.4, really have entered into the multi-screen internet age. And here at the GSB, and if you talk to a lot of both internet companies and offline companies, I think people will actually see these few years that we're in right now to be a very momentous period. And it's a period where there's tremendous change. There's a period of tremendous paranoia with the offline companies, where a lot of companies are feeling threatened or converged by really what's happening in the internet trends. And this actually has its pros and cons, which I'll also talk about. So we've entered the multi-screen internet age, and in China, really progressing to the third phase is that you're already seeing a lot of trends converging and happening at the same time, and where I think different companies, as we meet in a lot of the conferences, is we are learning from each other. Is from a copy to China to things happening simultaneously to really an age where companies are learning from each other across the world. And Chinese companies are creating what we call made in China innovation in many ways to drive that, and as we enter this new age. And really the crux of that, and I'm not telling you anything new here, is mobile is changing everything. In essence, for us in terms of video, that also means that with video, with the mobile screen, it's with you all the time. And really goes back to the One Verge vision, because we back in 2005 to 2006, we said, okay, starting from the PC screen, all this is going to converge into multi-screen world. And with the mobile, changes everything in the sense that it's with you all the time. With the PC, that's not the case. And actually also impacts commerce. Because at the end of the day, this is the screen that's with you, that's close to your purchase location and occasion. And when you actually see visual images, that can impact not just the content you consume or what you decide to do, what you decide to eat, or what you decide to consume, or what you decide to buy. As these trends converge, we see a tremendous amount of opportunities in the US and China around the world. And what it has accelerated is, I think, 1.3, people are starting to talk about O2O, online to offline. But I'll actually prefer to call it online plus offline, really the convergence of online and offline. A month ago, I hosted a group of venture capitalists who actually visited China, went to 20 different companies, and by design, we had them, we were the last visit. They came to office and asked Bill, basically, it's like, okay, after having seen 20 companies in China, what are some summary thoughts? And one of the things that really struck me was that he said, well, we hear all these things about O2O in the US, but we're seeing that in China, this whole O2O, O plus O, is actually happening faster in China than the rest of the world. And when he said that, I kind of gave him a hypothesis. So why could that be the case? And it actually goes back to my original thesis of how market conditions drive these kinds of changes of innovation. And that's really because if you look at offline companies here in the US, they're private, they're already in a very competitive environment. I was in a technology conference here in the US in March in Arizona, and I saw Brian Roberts from Comcast showing the Xfinity platform. And while you think, oh, Comcast is an old school company, which is an incumbent, when you look at the Xfinity platform, while I still don't believe his vision of the remote control, but the voice recognition, all those user interface and user experience, I think was pretty good. But in China, the same offline companies, whether you're talking about financial services, healthcare, education, entertainment, media, and so forth, they are highly regulated in an insulated environment, and most of these companies are state-owned. Whereas the Chinese internet companies have been fiercely competitive in a private market that are listed globally. And as such, a lot of the offline companies in China feel that they're, because of their market conditions and their history, they feel even more surprised by all these changes that's caused by the mobile. And so that's why, my belief that the online plus offline trend is happening faster, because the offline world is so much less ready for really these convergence between the online and offline world. So in our space, to give you an example, this whole O plus O, online plus offline, in terms of movies. When we first started out, I guess in some ways we were like Netflix in the sense that we have the post-theater video on demand business. We're like YouTube in the sense that we've been very involved in movie marketing and distribution. And at the same time, like I mentioned, we've also developed a lot of micro movies that has actually generated a lot of young and aspiring directors who are actually making now big movies. But starting from last year, because of these changes on the mobile, we're seeing that a lot of offline companies are working with us closer and closer, where we really feel that we are actually converging with the offline space. For example, recently we worked with Disney on the Captain America Winter Soldier, I think, if I got that right. And we actually did a live broadcast of the premiere in Beijing where Scarlett Johansson and some of the other stars of the movie was in Beijing during the premiere. And plus at the same time, they were on our show, which is a hit show called Star Talk, where we have access to all the top, the director as well as all the stars, which gets over 10 million video views per day, per episode. For all that we're really seeing ourselves working very closely where we pick 2-3 movies of a month where we can actually impact box office offline. At the same time, last year, we started working with, people may remember the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon movie. The producer is a fellow called Bill Kong, a friend of mine. And we actually co-produced a movie by Andy Lau, Liu Dehua, which is one of the big actors in Hong Kong. And we actually produced a movie which became the biggest hit for Andy in China. This year, actually, we're going to have a micro movie, which was very popular in China a few years ago, called Old Boys, that we again working with offline companies where we are co-producing. And that micro movie is going to be a big screen movie that's coming out later this year. So we're seeing that these online and offline opportunities are really coming together. And the same kind of thing is happening, actually, across all the different genres, whether it's TV series or animation or music and performances and so forth and so forth. So, kind of in summary, when we first started the company in terms of the vision of convergence into one, a search fund, and then in 2006, after due diligence, we said, okay, we think that we got to build, we actually had a couple of business models, and we decided to build an online video website first. And that's how it started, both Youku and Tudou. But as the mobile becomes more and more important, we don't no longer view ourselves as the video website. Because now, after only 2 years, our mobile traffic actually exceeded our web-based traffic. Like, we were doing about 25 million daily video views second quarter 2012. And now we're at a stage where we're doing close to 400 million. So the acceleration of the mobile-based traffic is phenomenal, where we are seeing our mobile traffic, our app traffic, actually larger than our old business, which is a website. So our website is actually a smaller business comparing to our app business right now. So as we move forward, as we see these offline opportunities ahead of us, at this point in time, we think that we're moving to become really a multi-screen entertainment platform. So as the market opportunities emerges, we are really pushing the envelope and thinking about how we view our company. So that's for Youku and Tudou. But pulling back again, thinking about having seen these 20 years of Chinese internet, looking forward, people may be asking, okay, it's great, 20 years, so what's next? So what are the key trends that we're seeing going forward? So I want to kind of give a couple of highlights of my thoughts here. Oop, what happened here? There should be another 3 slides. But if there isn't, I can memorize them. I think there are 3 trends I kind of want to highlight to the group. Well, first of all, I'll start with the US. A friend of mine actually bought a Google Chromebook, I guess, and then was complaining to me how that it's not possible to be on the Chromebook and use Skype. Oh, Skype's owned by Microsoft. Oh, I can't use Apple iTunes. Oh, Google doesn't like Apple. right? So the point I'm trying to make is really, internet started as an open platform, and in the US, and it's increasingly so happening in China as well, is moving to become a semi-closed system. And that's actually problematic from a user experience standpoint, and certainly something that we don't, believe. And in China, you probably also read about the really kind of the large size companies, and a lot of people may have read our recent strategic investment from Alibaba. And which we announced actually last Monday, and actually that one of the reasons why I couldn't actually commit to coming here until last week. And we're also seeing the same situation like Google, Apple, or Microsoft, or Facebook, all these companies in the valley kind of closing themselves to each other. And in China, what we want to prevent, and it's also starting to happen, is like, these great companies, Alibaba, who really started from a kind of a B2B company, which actually you don't really see any global examples, and launched C2C as well as payment and B2C in Tmall, and has been very successful. Or Tencent, from instant messaging, a la AIM, to become very much kind of a social, gaming, mobile, and internet value-added platform. And these platforms and these companies are starting to feel that they used to be very different businesses, and they're all converging and competing with each other. But even then, I would argue that we should really encourage the whole internet to be more open. And that was the way that we thought about strategic investment when we talked to these companies. One of the things that we insisted on is we'll only take a minority investment, and we'll continue to open, to cooperate with other companies in the ecosystem. And as we think about how we develop our own ecosystem, we also want to think of it as a very open way, very much like the Stanford way. Okay, so that's point number one. Two, over the last 20 years, and maybe the exception of the last maybe 2 to 3 years, most of the Chinese internet companies, while they've gone public all around the world, we've all been very focused on the domestic market. And I think we are starting to see some of the leading companies look overseas, and you will see, looking forward, these Chinese internet companies starting to go global. Now, of course, going global takes a completely different skill set. And what's interesting is, and we can talk a little bit about, actually US internet companies have had actually some success and some failure stories when they come to China. And when we actually talk among the Chinese entrepreneurs, like, okay, when we look at the US or other parts of the world, let's think about which markets to enter, as well as whether we need a local partner. So what will be interesting to see is whether the leading Chinese internet companies will actually partner with a lot of the leading international internet companies, and whether they will become successful or not. Okay, so I think that's probably a second very important phenomenon I see. The third is actually going back to my whole point on online plus offline. I don't think there will ever be, again, any pure online companies or pure offline companies where all these convergences are happening around us. Whether it's convergence across multiple screens, whether it's convergence between online and offline, whether it's convergence with US, Korea, Japan, China, all these internet markets around the world. If in 20 years of internet, you're seeing all these pockets of innovation that are starting to learn from each other, I would like to, if there's one point I want to convey, is all these innovation and all these are converging. And all these things are all happening into an environment where we see, starting from 1.3 and 1.4, as we look in the next 10 years and next 20 years of Chinese internet or global internet. This is the time. This is the now period where we see these things converging, and we see even more opportunities in the future. And looking back, 20 years ago, I was sitting where you are. And now I'm here with a little bit more white hair, and thinking about, as you think about your career, as you think about the GSB, change lives, change organizations, change the world. And here we have an opportunity where you see we're really in the beginning of multi-screen internet. What kinds of things you can do in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, and what we can do as an industry in open internet to create more innovation and more opportunities for the world. Thank you very much. So how did I do in time? Probably went a little bit long, right?
Hello, Victor. This is Simon
Summarized
Zhu.
20 years.
Okay, second year of MBA, so actually I have two questions. The first question, you said right now online piracy is still a big problem in China. So I'm just wondering, technologically, also for the policy-wise, what kind of change do you see right now in China that trying to solve this problem? And okay, can I say the second question?
Okay.
Also? Okay, yeah. So the second question is about the multi-screen entertainment. You mentioned right now, like you are trying to build a multi-screen platform. So also I did some research about multi-screen. So I see like people are always using the smartphone, the tablet in the home. So I'm just wondering, can you say a bit more about specifically what kind of strategy you have to be in the multi-screen?
Very good
Just
questions.
to do like a mobile app or including those kind of gamification or social interaction to the multi-screen. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, piracy. When we actually, at the end of last year, we had a cross-industry initiatives among the Chinese video websites, as well as MPA, as well as the leading domestic movie companies like Huayi or like Bonar. And we've actually had a fair amount of success, both the legal and the regulatory side, especially the consumer-facing ones, which were mobile apps. Actually, a lot of the mobile apps, they were asked to be taken down as they lost their lawsuits. But you're right, from a technology standpoint, a lot of these services have pulled it away to these cloud-based, like I want to say BitTorrent, P2P software, or cloud-based, I don't want to say Dropbox, but but a little bit like that. Those kinds of services where we still see piracy. So it will be a continuing, really exercise for us to keep working with authorities and working with the legal system to help them identify all these pockets of piracy and really driving to that. So that's one. The other one is actually a very good question. And when you think about multi-screen, actually, Asia has actually an interesting opportunity because here most people drive. In Asia, most people, because they're very dense, most people take public transportation. So we're starting to see our users basically on the mobile phone screen on the subway, and then wanting to go home, and they may be 20 minutes into a show, they want to go home and have that experience continue on their tablet or their big screen. And so actually 2-3 years ago, we started developing a lot of these cloud-based services, basically following the user across screens. So they're literally going to the same point in time on the next screen. And after you finish the screen, we're also tracking what kind of content that user is watching across different screens at different times. Because in the morning, you may be more interested in news bites, and in the afternoon, going back to work is when people started watching TV series and variety shows. So on the way to work and going back to work, actually, going back home, actually people watching different content. And what kind of things you recommend to them at different times. Also, we've, starting about 2 years ago, also started developing this technology where the mobile phone actually remote controls the large screen. And all these screens will actually start interacting with each other. Imagine, well, when you're sitting on the couch with a tablet and you're browsing through content, you click and it goes, a little bit like AirPlay, I guess. But how do you get your apps to really interact with your big screen? And very similar to Netflix, we actually developed, work with a lot of the smart TV as well as the set-top box manufacturers in terms of, because Youku Tudou were the other top brands. So we kind of the default solution for a lot of the APIs that a lot of these kind of device manufacturers actually work with us. So I hope that addresses your question. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the inspiring talk. I'm actually an undergrad at Stanford. I also have two questions.
Sure.
So the first one is that you mentioned that there's a trend that the internet company gonna get together and cooperate with each other in the next few years, right? But it can be problematic because it have the potential to block any other startups to enter the market. So how do you solve that problem? And the second question is that, as we can see right now, there's a lot of international students from China who have this education background. And a lot of us might probably go back to China in a few years. So do you have any advice for us? And also, how do you think that our position in the work market gonna be in the future? And also, how do you think if we go back and become entrepreneur in China, do you have any advice on that? Thank you very much.
Okay, there's a good, bad, and ugly here. Okay, I'll say the tough part first. Okay, So what we're seeing is as we move to mobile internet, initially a lot of people in the entrepreneur as well as the VC community think, okay, this is a new age of moving from PC and mobile internet. There's going to be plenty full of opportunities. Now, while there still are opportunities, if you look really at the top 10 and top 20 apps, really in China, what you find is that most of them are actually from some of the top companies. In fact, if you look at the top, say, 10 PC internet companies, some of them actually been struggling moving to the mobile internet. And I would say roughly half of them actually have made it in the top 10 in terms of mobile internet. But when you look at the top 10 to 20, you really don't see a lot of startup apps. And even the startup apps are heavily invested by some of the big players. So that is unfortunately a reality. As when we started the PC internet, there weren't any incumbents, right? So, but now with the mobile internet, you've got PC internet incumbents that are leveraging their market power or their capabilities to move to mobile internet. Now, but the fortunate thing is, I think starting from 2 years ago, and we like to think we have a little bit to do with that because of the merger between Youku and Tudou. Because before that, there really weren't a lot of MA. People don't like mergers. People don't like acquisitions. And I remember when I was the portal, when I did 3 acquisitions while there, but they were like 10 million US or that, and that was already very unusual back then. But now, in the last 2 years especially, you're starting to see billion-dollar mergers and investments. And that's something that's really changed in the last 2 years. So we used to be, as Chinese entrepreneurs, are very envious of the Silicon Valley and say, okay, now there's no way but IPO, so we got to make it to the IPO, right? But now there's actually quite a healthy M&A market now. And so as a founder, I think going public is one way, but that's no longer another way. So I think that with market changes, as market matures, I think you have to take the good with the bad. That's probably my kind of synopsis of what's happening.
Last question. Hi, I'm Derek. I'm a second-year MBA student. You talked a little bit about your company's efforts in online programming at Shift. Now we've seen Amazon and even Microsoft doing the same thing. I'm curious, are you seeing more of that in China, tech companies getting into that space? And if so, what do you think is driving that trend?
Going to what
move
space?
into original content.
Okay. Well, I think different companies move the original content for different ways. Like I mentioned, in the case of Netflix, if you talk to those guys, it's like they always struggle to pay lots of money to buy kind of syndicated content, but usually at a very, very late window. So they realize, and the fees keep going up. It's not easy to negotiate with Hollywood or Burbank because it's so concentrated, I talk about. So they started looking at math. It's like, okay, it's going to be very hard to be profitable because every time I make money, they ramp up the fees, right? And then still, I want to get early windows, and after 3 years and 5 years, it doesn't work. As you probably saw recently, HBO signed a deal with Amazon Prime, right? And if you talk to Jeff Bezos, I mean, Netflix is the arch rival, right? It's like, actually, I understand Netflix subscriber base actually exceeded that of HBO this year in the US. So you actually see those things happening. But I think what happens is that original content helps these players get content in a much early window, as also innovation like binge watching or big data, all the stuff that Netflix packages. So early window, more cost effective, as well as help you actually create innovation models. Also branding. I mean, as HBO, think about HBO without The Sopranos or Sex and the City or like Games of Thrones. And I think for online companies also understand what that means for a brand. And so that's why we also do a lot of original content like that. But for Amazon and I think Hulu is also trying to do the same thing, Microsoft, I think people appreciate and understand that. Is like that's really a phase where once you've got a distribution platform of a certain scale, then you have the potential to be able to actually foster original content. If you don't have the reach, you can spend a lot of money and you won't get anywhere. So that's actually a very interesting dynamic. And why you think about the business has to have to evolve at different times doing different things. Hope that helps. Okay?
Please join me in thanking Victor on behalf of China 2.0 and Global Speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, thank you.